Hey guys and girls, Board Now back with you and back with Rachel McDonald. On this video, we're returning to The Haunting of Hill House. So this is going to be our review of episode 4, which is called The Twin Thing. So this episode focuses more on Luke and with his addiction from the past particularly, and kind of the twin thing is like referencing him and now, so we get a little bit of their connection in this episode too. It's like days at the clinic and sort of him going through the process, problems in dealing with this. Obviously, again, it features hints of supernatural scenes with him obviously still traumatized from the past, and he has this sort of like new friendship with this character called Joey, who they rely on each other a lot, and it's quite like an interesting insight to the way these places work, because at one point Luke is told, we recommend that you don't get attached to anyone to in your first year of being in rehab, essentially. So there's this idea that although in some ways having a close friend to support you could be a good thing, then there are downsides to that. And I think one of the things they're saying about Luke in this episode is that I think, like any addict, you have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet before you can really get too involved and share like the problems of others. It's like a personal mission of his where he has to try and save Joey as well as things become more desperate for them. But this is another dark episode in a different way, and I think obviously again we definitely see good and bad sides to Luke, and it's definitely a hard watch. I mean, I've hinted before that I had a brother who went through similar things, and I think watching this episode this time, although there were definitely moments where I felt sympathetic for Luke, I think there were moments where he was very frustrating as well as a character. And yeah, I could see some. I think it was a very true depiction of that sort of addiction. So, what did you think of the episode?
Yeah, so this episode is very harrowing. It's very hard to watch. It is the first time we obviously see things from Luke's perspective, because up until now we've only seen him through his siblings' perspective, and obviously that perspective has not been great. You know, we've seen him run out on rehab that cost Shirley $6,000. We've seen him steal from Steve. We've seen him turn up to Nell's wedding high. So the impression that we've gotten of Luke so far has not been a great impression. Now, obviously, with this episode, we're going to be talking about delicate subjects like addiction and drug use. Now, this is an area where I personally don't have experience, so I'm obviously going to try and speak about this as respectfully as I can, but I am coming from a perspective of someone who hasn't dealt with anyone who's been addicted or ever had addiction problems myself. So it's a hard topic to broach, but I find this episode very, very harrowing, but also very interesting to see Luke clean and sober, and actually to see what he must be like without the drugs, because obviously when you are on drugs or you are an alcoholic or some sort of addict, that changes your personality. You know, whoever you are when you are on the drugs, when the drugs are in your system, is different to who you are when you are sober. And so I think it's nice that we finally get to see Luke sober and clean and actually see that he is, you know, he's a good guy, he's a nice guy. He obviously has a bit of a self-deprecating sense of humor. His relationship with Joey is obviously very sweet, but it is interesting, like you touched upon, that they say, you know, you shouldn't hang your addiction on another person, especially on another addict who is struggling themselves. It's like you were saying, you need to learn to deal with it on your own, so that the next time you fall, you don't depend on someone to kind of save you. But we do see that he has obviously latched onto Joey a little bit, because she's been so good to him and so friendly to him. So I think in this episode, he receives his 90-day chip, and he says that that's the longest that he's ever been. He's never made it to 90 days before, and we get to see him, you know, be proud of himself for that and actually talk about how far he's come and how well he's doing. And that's actually a really good thing for Luke, and obviously would help a lot in his recovery, feeling good about himself. But we also see the root, well, not the root of his trauma, but we start to see exactly why he takes drugs, because we see that he's being followed by this figure from his childhood. So in the Hill House flashbacks, we get to see exactly how haunted poor little Nell and little Luke are. And can we just talk about how precious little Luke is with his little glasses and his little bowler hat, his little shoes, and he's so cute. And I love little Luke and little Nell. They are precious, and the two little actors who play them are just adorable. And we get to see their twin bond and how close they are. There's a really sweet moment where Nell says to Luke, little Nell says to little Luke, "You're scared," and he says, "No, I'm not." And she's like, "Yes, you are, and I know because I'm scared too." And it's just it's very, very cute to see how close they are, and they talk about that as they get older. Obviously the episode is called The Twin Thing, and they talk about how Luke and Nell have some sort of bond between them, which in reality is actually obviously not as strong as it's shown in TV shows, but that is actually a thing. Like, there have been studies done on like identical twins being able to like feel each other's emotions and have some sort of connection, which I guess makes sense when you think about it on a biological sense. But I like that this episode builds that up, because of course over the course of this episode Luke starts to physically feel Nell's death, and we see over the course of the episode him getting worse and worse as he feels the effects of her death more and more. So first it starts with a sore neck, and then he starts to get chills, then he becomes cold, then his limbs start to stiffen up, and he explains that it feels like he's going through withdrawal, but he hasn't used. And the whole episode just sees him get progressively worse and worse as he feels Nell's death. And it's kind of horrifying, and I found it really horrifying that he was experiencing that. What did you think of that angle? Did you think it was effective?
Horror into this episode, and yeah, it definitely sold me on the bond between them, and how in many ways, I mean, sure, it's going to affect the whole family, but how I think it's just a bit different when you have twins, and that connection is just a bit more raw and personal. And his wedding for him would be a big blow, and as we said, there are certain reasons behind that. So it's not like he was totally innocent in that, but obviously nonetheless missing the wedding would be devastating for him, and just some of the stuff he's gone through. And obviously he has, let's say, a mixed relationship with the other siblings, which we definitely see more of in this episode. So I think in a way he's now is the one who he's always maintained a close bond with, but there's sort of a tragic like irony that in some ways, just through circumstances, she's the one who he's had the least amount of contact with in the more present scenes, I would say. Obviously not in the past, but in the more present scene. Just circumstances have sort of driven them apart, and the metaphor in this episode is very striking, very effective, because in a way I sort of took it as the guy with the bowler hat, like the spirit with the bowler hat, this guy who we see a lot, just like random scenes, and it again plays on, is it in Luke's head or is it really there? But I sort of took that visual, that character, to be like a metaphor for like Luke's addiction, and the fact that it just hangs over him all this time, because I think without having actually suffered that sort of addiction myself, I think that's at its core what an addiction is, until you finally get to the point where you confront it and you beat it. I think for a very long time it hangs over you. That's all horror stuff with that character, with that spirit, and it's either the end scene or like really, no, I think it's close to the end, but where it slowly moves towards him and is like literally right on top of him, and that was a really scary scene. That was,
the first time that I made Stephen watch The Haunting of Hill House, when we got to that scene and the guy started floating, I remember Stephen just sitting up and being like, no, you stop that, because it was just that creepy. Yeah, a lot of people say that the bent neck lady is the figure that scares them the most. For me, it's the bowler hat dude. I find him really creepy. There is that scene, because obviously you find out, like, there's a scene where the parents are going through a bunch of the stuff that's been left in the house, old buttons, old books, old clothes, and Luke picks up the bowler hat and is wearing the hat. Now, we will get this story filled in a little bit later, but the bowler hat belongs to this spirit, and he's looking for his hat. But there is a very creepy, very effective scene where you see little Luke wake up in the middle of the night and he can hear something moving, and he goes outside and you just see this tall guy who kind of looks like a cross between the Gentleman and Slender Man, kind of floating around in the hallway. And then Luke runs back inside and hides under his bed, and then the figure floats in and gets his hat. And that whole sequence still gives me the creeps so badly, because it's such a effective kind of haunted house scene of this poor little kid being haunted by this specter who he obviously doesn't know this is going to hurt him. And I think this is after Luke has been trapped in the basement, so he's already had a bad experience with ghosts in this house.
Is that the scene when he's under the bed?
Yes.
That's very scary. Just the way it's shot, and the sound effect as well, with him like gliding along the floor, and just him stopping, because you see it all from Luke's perspective, which makes it more scary. You know, this little boy, and he's just praying, then whatever this guy is, whatever this thing is, then he's just gonna not look under the bed.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. It's a great scene. It's such an effective scene. I think the first time I watched the series, that scene like scared the crap out of me. I was so tense. And then of course you see the tall man following him, and now I have a slightly different perspective on what he's supposed to represent. So I do understand where people are coming from with him being a metaphor for Luke's drug addiction. I think he goes a little deeper than that, and I think we will have to circle back to this when we get to later episodes and we get more reveals about what exactly happened in the house. Because I think that the tall man I think he's linked to Luke's addiction, but I think he's actually more supposed to represent the trauma that is fueling Luke's addiction, which we will find out what this trauma is. So I think I'm just going to say this right now, guys, and then we won't discuss it because don't get too bad. But just keep in mind that when Luke finally turns around to face the tall man at the end of the episode, and actually turns around to look him in the eye, he's turned into his mother. And that's all I'm going to say, but just keep that in mind, because that will become relevant. And that's why I think that the tall man is representative of Luke's trauma from the house, the same way the bent neck lady is representative of Nell's trauma from the house, and that it is this trauma that fuels his drug addiction. Because he does actually say that the reason that he started to take drugs, when he's given his speech, when he's given his 90-day speech, he says that the reason that he started to take drugs is because there were things in his childhood that he used to see. And when he started to take the drugs, he wouldn't see them anymore. And then he would get clean and they would come back. So he would take the drugs so that he wouldn't have to see them. So this is obviously his trauma that's been haunting him, and why he's taken the drugs, and why he became an addict, and how that kind of happened, and we will see as the series goes on exactly what happened to him. But I do find it interesting that him and Nell seem to be the two siblings that were affected the worst by Hill House. And so it's interesting to see, and we'll get to this because next episode is Nell's episode, the juxtaposition between how they've managed to deal with it or not deal with it for the time, because this episode really shows how the two of them in particular were very much haunted by the house. And I don't know if it's maybe to do with their age. You know how a lot of movies and TV shows will say when you're younger, you can see ghosts, but you get older and you stop being able to see them because you're too cynical. So I'm wondering if maybe Luke and Nell were haunted because they were so young, that they were just more open and more vulnerable to the house. But the house really like fucks with them and messes them up. And they're just so precious, you know, they're so tiny, and you just want to protect them and just to hug them and wrap them up in a blanket and tell them everything's going to be okay. I spent a lot of the episode just wanting to protect Luke. Even adult Luke is still very precious. I think the actor is really good and really sells him. I'm very curious as to what you thought about the scene where you see him go to Steve's for dinner after he's been 30 days sober, and Steve is a bit of a dick. Like, what did you think of that scene? did you think Steve was too harsh, or what do you reckon?
Negative in the scene. I think when you've had someone, a brother, who's had addiction problem like that is a positive step. And I think it's one thing if he makes constructive comments and sort of says, this is good, but you've still got a long way to go. I think there's nothing wrong with saying that. But in the scene in general, he was pretty awful, because I hated the way he spoke about Joey, and obviously there were scenes around the dinner table. And I mean, that was like, Joey's response was quite interesting, because I thought her response was really good in the scene. I thought she stuck it back to him and was fair, but didn't go too far. But I thought, yeah, Steve, it's almost like he was basing a lot on stereotypes, and obviously there's something tragic later on, then in a way his prediction does come true. But in that scene, that's kind of not the point. The point of it is that he should have been supportive of his brother. I think, as I said before, I think with this episode, there's certain frustrations with Luke. I do think there's certain kind of contradictions where he's made of himself a bit too much. And obviously there's certain scenes where, with like the person who runs the support place, he doesn't understand totally why she has to put these rules in place. So I think there are moments in the episode where Luke acts a little bit self-indulgent and a little bit like unaware of others. And obviously we get the flip side to the scene with Steve that we got in the first episode. So the other side of that is, then I can understand what Luke has put his family through, which have certainly the first time I watched the show made me more negative on Steve. Visit what he thinks is going to be Steve, but Steve's not there, because Steve's got a divorce with, it's Lee, isn't it, his ex-wife? I think it's Lee.
Yes, I think so. Yes, yeah. I think.
Yeah, so he expects Steve to be there. And it's, again, this thing which sometimes happens with addicts, where they do fall back on family members to just bail them out. And obviously, in this case, Luke is hoping that he'll not only bail him out, but also help out Joey. Point of view, that's a pretty bad scene, and Lee handles it actually well. Like, she's not like totally nasty, but
no, she's firm.
Yeah, she's firm.
Yeah.
She makes it clear, no, I can't keep lending you money.
Yeah.
I think in the end she does sort of cave and gives him Steve's location, because
he
shows up at the house. But obviously she's uncomfortable about that as well. And it's actually one of these like clever reveals. Then we find out that they've sort of separated. And this is obviously something Luke wouldn't know.
I have to admit, even being a Steve fan, I do think that he is incredibly harsh in that scene. It's like you said, he could be firm and still be telling Luke, you still have a way to go, there's still trust issues, without being such a dick. And I really didn't like that he kind of took it out on Joey as well. It's like, this is a person that your brother's brought home, a friend, like, you should be treating them with respect. Like, you shouldn't be just treating them like they're just some addict that your brother's just brought home off the streets. And I think that he is quite harsh. I do really like Joey's response when Steve points out that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And she points out that that's not what rehab is. She said doing rehab is doing the same thing but different. She says, every single relapse is different. Every single recovery is different. Every single time you try, it's going to be different, which I'm assuming is that is what it's like with recovery. When you're trying to recover from a debilitating addiction, it would be like that, just trying again and again and again until it finally sticks. Did someone just, so I thought that scene was very good in showing how sometimes, even if your family member has been hard to you, that sometimes they need your compassion, sometimes they need your understanding. And again, it comes down to this whole thing of you can say how many chances is he going to give Luke, because by Luke's own admission, he has stolen from Steve many times and screwed them over, but you don't have to be that much of a dick. And I do think that Steve was unnecessarily harsh in that scene, and that he has some moments there where it's just like, come on, man, like, your brother's trying. Can you at least acknowledge that he's trying? Can you at least, you don't have to be absolutely 100%, yes, I accept you back and everything's forgiven, but you don't have to be also this extreme. And then I think the juxtaposition between that and the scene you were talking about with Lee is a great example, because she is very firm. You know, she tells Luke, we cannot keep doing this again. You can't keep coming here. But by the same token, she's also like, I can see that you are clean. You look different. You look better. It's good that you're doing good. You know, she's encouraging, but she's also firm. You kind of have to draw lines, I think, in these situations. You know, there has to be a certain line that you can go to, but you're not willing to cross over in terms of supporting family members who are going through this, but you also don't have to be a dick about it. So I think that those two scenes were very well done to show the different ways of dealing with someone who has caused these kind of problems in your family. Because as we've said before, addiction is an illness, but it is an illness that does affect your family members and does affect your loved ones. And there is a reason that one of the 12 steps is to make amends and take responsibility for your own actions. And we see that Luke has reached that step and that he is struggling with it a bit, because as he says, it is the hardest step to go through. And then we see, and I think this part of the episode is very interesting, we actually see Luke get a little bit of a taste of his own medicine when he's trying to find Joey a motel room for the night so that she can come down, and she steals his money and she runs off, and he finally knows what it's like on a very, very small scale compared to his siblings, but he actually finally knows what it's like to deal with another addict who's going to behave like this, behave selfishly and recklessly, and take advantage of your kindness. So I did think it was very interesting to see that he got a little bit of a taste of what that was like and what that must have done to him as a person, because he's obviously devastated when she runs off. And I think it's more because he's worried about her, but he also would get a little bit of a taste of what he's done to his siblings over the years with that incident.
Yeah, no, she ends up like leaving, like just taking the money and leaving. I think it's more to do with that's a problem with her and addiction, rather than, you know, I don't believe this is someone who was always using him.
No, definitely.
I think there were feelings there, and sort of definitely a cautionary moment for Luke, where it's something he maybe has to learn from. And if you like form a bond with someone, I think you maybe get a bit too carried away and sort of speed things up. And I think with Luke in this episode, I just, there probably is this sense of it's part of his journey that then he has to try and be there for someone else. He has to try and save someone else, almost, of trying to face up to the demons of the past. And obviously it sort of backfires, and it's quite sort of sad and tragic. But I think obviously in life we do learn from these things, and I mean, obviously, fingers crossed you come back and you're a stronger person as a result, because it obviously ends on quite a positive note, which is in the past with Luke giving like the speech at the AA, and we obviously see Joey there supporting him, and there's some nice scenes with them in the episode, because the early sort of scene as well, the way the episode opens, so it's sort of bookended in that way, because it kind of opens with that sort of scene as well. So
yeah, it's definitely an interesting insight into what it's like to be in recovery and to be surrounded by people and to not get too dependent on other people for your own recovery, and how much you have to work at it and the effort that it takes to kind of make amends and get yourself through something like that. And I think this is why Luke is such an endearing character within the series, because he is one of the characters that really struggles the most to come back from what happened to them, because his addiction has become so debilitating. I mean, I think he says in his speech that it's taken him 10 years to get to the point where he can be 90 days sober. I mean, that's not a small, amount of time, especially in Luke's life. He's only 30 at this point. And
Sure.
yeah, so I think that he is such a sympathetic character because you see this very real struggle that so many people can relate to, because addiction is such a terrible and debilitating illness and so many people suffer from it. And so I think that makes Luke a really, really relatable character and a really endearing character, because we all want a character that we can root for, that we can say, yes, become a better version of yourself, take your journey, get to the end of your journey. We want those kind of characters that we can encourage and kind of get behind. And I think that Luke really gives us that. He's such a great, endearing character. But I do think that you're right, that you see that the downside to his character and how he can be reckless and how his addiction has affected others and how it's, caused him to be not a great person at times. So I do think this episode is all the episodes in this show, we haven't come across a bad episode yet. I don't think we will, but they just keep seeming to go from strength to strength, because I think this is such a solid episode. And then, of course, we have that really devastating end scene where Steve and the social worker find him, and he's shivering and he's stiff, and he's going on. He's like, it feels like I used, but I didn't use. I swear I didn't use. And Steve, you can just see the devastation on his face that he's having to come and tell his little brother this news, and he's all like, Nell's dead, she killed herself. And I love that final shot, that zoom in when Steve says Nell killed herself. I mean, it zooms in on Luke, and that's right, he's like, it was suicide. And Luke's just like, no, it wasn't. Like, he knows instantly that this was not real, but this is not natural. He already knows. And maybe it's something to do with the twin thing, maybe it's something to do with the actual trauma that he and Nell experienced in the house, but he knows right from the beginning, no, she didn't kill herself. This is not what it appears to be, which we obviously will go into in Nell's episode, which is the next one. But I did find that very interesting, that like of all the siblings, Luke was the first one to say, no, this is not right. This is not how it happened. She didn't actually do this. And we're going to get some great Steve and Luke scenes in the episode after next, which we will talk about. But Steve coming to get Luke and bringing Luke to the funeral home, I think shows that Steve still has that big brother instinct that he had when they were younger. Because, we've talked about in a previous episode, seeing Luke and Steve when they were kids and they were hanging out and they were obviously close and they were friends. And so I think that the end of this episode, and we'll see it a little bit more in the future episodes, starts to bring that bond back a bit and show Steve being the big brother and actually stepping up and being there for his siblings. So I really liked that end scene. I thought the episode ended on a very strong note.
Very raw scene, very harrowing. It was very well done. Good acting from both of them in that scene. So it was another really strong episode. I think personally the previous episode, the Theo one, was it's still my favourite.
I agree, but the Theo one was a bit stronger, definitely, but this one still is just
still
as far
strong.
I
think the Sherry one so far is my least favourite of the four we've seen. So, but it's a high bar. So even that, when you look at that episode, if you're saying that maybe is the weakest of the 10, then that's a pretty high standard, because it's not like that's a bad episode. So it's still strong in its own way. So it's all good, really. Episode 4 of The Haunting of Hill House. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below if you've been watching along with us, if you've seen this episode. What do you think of Luke as a character? What do you think of some of the stuff in this episode? The scene with him and Steve, the relationship with Joey. Let us know your thoughts. Share us out on social media. Obviously, you can ding the bell on YouTube for more notifications. And we'll be back with more Haunting of Hill House soon, and more horror TV, more horror movies in general throughout the month. So thanks for listening. See you guys again soon.